Faith just like a seed, the only way it grows. Actions, love, mercy, walk humbly with you, God, in all things, in all ways. Walk humbly with you, God. Whether now or then, death is not my end. I know heaven waits for me. And though the road seems long, I never walk alone. And I got all I need to say. Come on. I know you love me. I know you found me. I know you saved me, and your grace will never fail me. And while I'm waiting, I'm now waiting. I know heaven lives in me. Should I suffer long? Well, this is not my home. I know heaven waits for me. And though the night is dark, well, heaven owns my heart. And I got all I need to sing. Come on. I know you love me. Sing it out. I know you found me. I know you saved me, and your grace will never fail me. And while I'm waiting, I'm now waiting. I know heaven lives in me. So I will sing like I will there in the fierce light of glory, where the darkness cannot find me, and your face is all I see. Oh, I will sing like a man with no sickness in my body, like no prison walls can hold me. I will sing like I am free.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for braving the cold today and coming out here. We have a presentation that we think is valuable for people engaging with how we understand and think of this world. So I won't say too much, but we'll have a time afterwards to be able to have afternoon tea, to chat and enjoy something delicious, maybe. So here we have the presentation, What Do You Mean by God?
Is there a God? It's a big question with significant implications. It has implications for us understanding whether there is meaning and purpose in the universe or just the meaning and purpose that we create for it ourselves. It impacts our questions about whether good and evil exist, right and wrong, or whether these are just useful lies that we've made up to help everyone get along. Is there a God? A big question with significant implications. And I'm willing to bet that at least once, maybe in the middle of the night when you were struggling to fall asleep, you found yourself asking this question. But have you ever asked the question before that question? Before is there a God comes, what is God? If we're going to think about God's existence, we need to think about what it is we are deciding that exists. Is there a what? Now, there are two possible ways that we could look to answer this question, what is God? Option one, we could go to some of those religious traditions and sacred texts from around the world, the Torah, the Quran, the Vedas, the Bible, and see what they have to say. Now, if you're a believer, if you agree with these texts and you're happy to trust them, that might work for you. But if you're not, if you see no reason why we should turn to them or trust this teaching, this method doesn't work so well. But don't worry. If you're in that camp, there's a second way to go about answering the question, what is God? It's a way that is open to everyone, that anyone can engage with, whether you believe or don't, whether you're happy to trust religion or not, whether you take it on faith or want to verify everything for yourself. This second method is looking around at our experience of the world and reflecting on it rationally. This method invites us to consider that maybe the reason we struggle to see God is not because he is too far away, but in fact, he is so close. We are so used to him that we are unable to see him and understand who or what he is. In his 2005 commencement speech at Kenyon College, David Foster Wallace started with this parable. There were two fish swimming along one day when an older fish swam up towards them. Along the way, the older fish said, "Hey boys, how's the water?" The two fish swam on, a little confused. Turning to each other later, one said, "What on earth is water?" Just like how the fish struggles to understand what water is, not because it's so far away, but because they are so used to it. So it's maybe true that we struggle to understand what or who God is, not because he is hidden, but because we are so used to him, so much a part of our everyday lives. There is this second way to answer the question, what is God? By reflecting rationally and sensibly on our experience of the world. And that's what we're going to do today. Our guide would be David Bentley Hart, especially his book, The Experience of God, where he engages with many of the religious and philosophical traditions of the world, around the world now and throughout history, to answer this question. What follows is a summary of his work. We begin by reflecting on our sense of wonder when we realise how weird it is that the universe exists at all. I have this distinct memory as a child. I think I might have been 9 or 10 at the time. I was walking along the hallway of my childhood home. I can still feel the worn, shaggy green carpet under my feet, look across and see the sunlight coming through the window. It was late in the afternoon, the sun was beginning to set and the room was bathed with a warm glow. And a thought out of nowhere struck me. None of this has to exist. None of it all. Myself, this hallway, this house, this world, it's here, but it doesn't have to be. It could have been otherwise. It could have been not existing at all. Now, you would think a thought like this might fill me with a sense of dread or worry, but far from it. Almost the opposite. I was filled with this sense of wonder. Suddenly, everything around me felt more real, more alive, almost more magical, like it was a gift to me. You might have had a similar experience of that thought just hitting you. None of this has to exist, and yet it does. The philosopher Richard Taylor has come up with a thought experiment to help us remember this experience and then observe it. He says, imagine that you are walking through a forest, far away from human civilization. No one is around at all. When you come into a clearing, and there in the middle of nowhere, you find this massive, perfectly spherical, perfectly clear bowl. Now you would be struck by it. You would ask the questions, why is this here? And how is it here? And you certainly wouldn't think it just happened to be there for no reason at all. That would be obvious, says Taylor, if we came across this large, perfectly round sphere in the middle of nowhere. What might not be as obvious, but is just as true, he goes on to say, is we should feel exactly the same way about everything else in that forest. We don't notice it because we're just so used to the things that exist existing, but we should have the same sense of wonder for everything, he says. For the ground beneath our feet, for the rocks, the trees, the birds in the sky, for all of it, we should look at it and go, how is this here? And why is it here? And we certainly shouldn't think it is just there for no reason. But, and this is where it gets interesting, you'll find that nothing in the physical universe satisfactorily answers those questions. Take a tree from that forest. We could answer the question, why is this here and how is it here, by looking back into its past. We could say, well, this tree is here because an acorn from another tree fell down, landed on the ground, was covered by leaves that decomposed for mulch and watered by the rains, took root, grew up, and became this tree. That's why this tree is here. But obviously, that only pushes the question back one step, because then we need to say why that tree is there. And then the tree before it, and then the tree before that, and then whatever that tree evolved from, and whatever that evolved from. And we find that even if we somehow have an infinite train of trees, causing whatever it evolved from, being caused by that, that goes back to all eternity. At every single stage, the question will still be there. Why is this here? And how is it here? We also find no relief if we looked into how the tree is made up. We could answer the question of how is this tree here by saying, well, it's the structure of the wood. The grains of the wood give it strength, the strength that is needed to keep the tree standing. Great. But once again, we've come into the same problem we had before. We've only pushed the question back one step. Because then we need to answer, why is the wood the way it is? To which we could say, because of the chemical compounds that make it up. to which we would have to answer the reason for the chemical compounds with the structure of the atoms inside of it, down to the subatomic particles, down to the quantum states that are at the base of everything. But at every single stage, no matter how big the thing is or how small it is, from the universe itself down to the smallest quantum state, we are left with the same question. Why is this here? And how is it here? And we certainly shouldn't think it is there for no reason. This is the wonder of existence. When we look around the universe and everything within it, and we realize it need not be this way. In fact, it does not need to exist at all, and it cannot explain itself. It needs to be brought into being by something else. It is dependent. Everything is dependent on other things. To use the technical language, it is all contingent. It needs to be brought into being by something else. It has a beginning or an end. It changes or is made up of parts. It is limited by space or time and can't logically explain the reason for its own existence or any number of those things above. This whole universe and everything within it is contingent. There is no reason why it is here, and yet it is here all the same. Now, at this point, if you like, you can just acknowledge this and move on and go, the universe is just a bit weird. We just can't explain it. However, there have been many thoughtful and sensible thinkers from a range of different religious traditions and philosophical schools throughout history that have been armed with this intuition that things actually should make sense and should be logical, that have gone through another path. They have said, well, if this universe is all contingent, it can't explain itself. There must be something else that does. Something that is not like the universe at all. Something that is not dependent on other things to exist, but exists in and of itself. Something that is not contingent at all. Something that does not need to be brought into being by anything else. That has no beginning or end, but is eternal. That does not change, nor is made up of parts. That is not limited by space or time, but exists outside of it. That exists necessarily. Something that is beyond this universe, that can bring this universe into being and sustain it. It's what the philosopher Aristotle called the unmoved mover, and Plato called the good. The author of Genesis called the Lord who created out of nothing, and the Islamic scholar Wujub al-Wujud, being itself. What certain Hindu texts called Brahman, the eternal Godhead, and what we in English call capital G, God. This is our first answer to the question, what is God? Not just some powerful being that happens to exist within our universe. Zeus and Odin, small g gods, if they happen to exist, would be just another being within our universe. No, what we mean by capital G God is something different altogether, a reality outside of our physical and spiritual universe on which our universe depends. If our universe is a house of cards, then this capital G God is the infinitely deep and wide and tall table on which that house of cards sits. If we think of our universe like the light that fills the room, then God is the lamp at the center that shines forth and makes it possible. God is the eternal, infinite, necessary ground of all being that brings our universe into existence and sustains it. It's this God, I believe, that we encounter whenever we walk into a room and are hit again by that realization, none of this has to exist. and yet it's here all the same. When we realize there's no explanation for why this is all here, and our minds drift beyond it to wonder why. What is God? God is the ground of all being. Next, we move on to reflecting on another phenomenon that is just remarkable and amazing, but we take for granted because we're so used to it: our minds. I'm lucky enough to have young children, so the memory of them learning how to speak is pretty fresh. It's a wonderful thing to see a child learn to speak, partly because it's just so cute. When they come out with the mamas and the dadas, and the way they speak just melts your heart. But there's another reason why it's amazing to see, because it's a window into how our minds work. It's commonplace, we easily miss it, but it is remarkable what children's minds can do. One of the first words my eldest learnt to say was apple, and it worked like this. We would show him apple after apple after apple and say the sound apple. And then eventually, when we show it to him, he could say the word apple himself. On the surface, straightforward, but let's dig in. It is amazing that when we held this here and said the word apple, he just knew intuitively that it wasn't just a random noise we were making, but the noise was connected with the object. Even more remarkable, it's like he just came preloaded with the programming to understand that when we said the word apple for each of the apples we showed him, it didn't just connect to those 10 physical apples we had, but it pointed to something else, a concept, the concept of an apple. And anything else that looked a bit like this fit the concept apple. Even more remarkable again, when we showed him his first large green Granny Smith, because so far we'd only been showing him small pink ladies, it didn't take him long at all to understand that just because this was big and green didn't mean that it was something else. The smallness and the redness was not essential to what made an apple an apple. Something else was, something that I couldn't communicate to him, but he just understood intuitively. It's amazing what our minds can do. They can experience this world. They can experience the redness of the apple and the sweetness of the taste of its flesh. They can understand concepts, and not just concepts that we can see and touch like apple, but concepts that you cannot. You cannot take a picture of the idea of peace or paint a picture of fairness, the idea itself, and yet we understand these concepts. Our minds use reason and logic. We're able to think things like this: all chihuahuas are dogs. 1. This thing standing in front of me is a chihuahua. 2. Therefore, the thing standing in front of me is a dog. 3. And there's a lot of other things our minds can do. And what makes this even more remarkable is when we look at the world around us, the things we can see and touch, let's call this matter, well, it doesn't look like anything else can do this. A rock can't experience the world like our minds do. It's just there. Same with a waterfall or the breeze or the stars above us. Protons and neutrons, photons and gluons, none of them are able to understand abstract concepts. And chemical reactions and electricity, they don't reason or use logic. A chemical reaction doesn't react like it does because it makes sense. It just finds equilibrium. And electricity doesn't go down one path rather than another because it's logical. It just follows the path of least resistance. This is what's amazing about our world. We have our minds that are able to do these wonderful things like experience and understand abstract concepts and reason. And we have this matter that isn't able to do any of that, and yet they both exist together and they interact. Today, a lot of our effort goes into trying to understand how mind might have come out of matter, evolutionary and computational theories of the mind, for example. But there's been many people throughout history, rational and sensible and thoughtful minds from all sorts of religious and philosophical schools that have suggested that maybe it actually makes more sense to look at it the other way around, to understand that matter has come out of mind, that mind comes first. It makes sense to believe that there is a mind that came before everything, that thinks the complex mathematics that we know to be true but can't observe in our physical universe. It makes sense to believe that there was a mind outside of our universe that thought of everything within it, everything that exists from daffodils and daisies and dogs to supernovas and galaxies, and then thought through this combination of order and randomness that we see in the world necessary to evolve these things into being. It makes sense to believe that there is a mind above and beyond and through it all that thought of all the different forms of matter and the regular ways in which they would behave, what we call the laws of the universe. It makes sense that there's a mind that gives this universe the order that it has, that explains why quantum states exist in the first place, that explains why it is our universe is so good at creating life when on its own it shouldn't be at all. It makes sense, more sense, I believe, to see that matter came from mind, that mind was first, that there is a mind that created this all. This is the next thing we mean by the word capital G, God. Not just some very smart or clever being out there that we can't see or touch, but cleverness, mind itself. A mind that brought everything into being. If the universe is like a computer program, then this mind is like the computer itself, the fundamental programming on which it runs. You find this in all sorts of religious and philosophical schools. God is the mind, before, above, under, and through it all. Finally, we reflect on the desire that we all have for goodness, truth, and beauty. A little while ago, I was talking with an atheist friend of mine, and he made a comment about how he thought it was ridiculous to believe in God. That's when I had an idea. I turned to him and I asked, if I could prove to you, beyond all doubt, that you would be happier as a Christian, your life would be better, you would experience less pain and things would go better for you, would you do it? Would you come to church? Would you say you believed it, even if you didn't entirely? Would you go through the habits, be baptized, all of it? It didn't take him long to answer. Of course not, he said. Why? I pushed, a little cheekily. That time he reflected a little bit longer. Because I don't believe it, he said. Even if it helped me, it's not true. I just wouldn't want to commit myself to something I don't think is true. Now, I happen to believe that my friend had it the right way around. It is good for him to be committed to the truth. It is good to be committed to it, even if it means missing out. But this is the interesting question. Why? Why was he so committed to the truth? Why is it good for us all to be committed to the truth? You see, I think my friend here is the example of something that is true for all of us. We all have an innate, necessary, and unmovable desire for goodness, truth, and beauty. A lot of the things we do can be explained by our animal instincts to survive, reproduce, and have a constant flow of dopamine to our brains. But our decisions, all of our conscious decisions, I would say, cannot. We go without for the sake of others. We lead our families into going without to help those that we don't even know. We struggle and fight to find the truth. We make great sacrifices for great art. We give ourselves mental anguish and pain, seeking a fulfilling and meaningful life. We do all these sorts of things that go against our animal instincts for survival, reproduction, and dopamine. And when asked why, we come back to these three things. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, because it's good. Why? Because it's true. Why? Because I find it beautiful. It gives me bliss and joy. Because we have this desire that makes sense of us, that explains our decisions, this innate desire for goodness, truth, and beauty. It's the reason why, when a scientist might be tempted to just tweak their results ever so slightly so that their study looks more impressive and helps their career, they know, perhaps deep down, that it's the wrong thing to do, because they have this innate commitment and desire to the truth. And if you ask them why they were doing this, why they are so committed to truth, a thing you can't see or touch or experiment on, I suspect that their desire would go so deep they wouldn't even be able to answer. Well, just because it's the truth, it's good. It's why we feel this sense of outrage when we hear on the news that there's this team of scammers that have stolen people's life savings, their nest eggs, or overseas there are people who are suffering starvation because some rich warlord in their mansion isn't sharing what they have. It's why we get so angry at the injustice and the pain in the world, because we look around at these people who are causing suffering, and it's more than just we don't like what they're doing or it's not to our taste. We have this fundamental sense that it's wrong what they're doing, that they've misinterpreted what goodness is, or they've failed to live out their obligation to it. It's why we spend thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars making our homes look nice, or travelling to exotic locations, or buying expensive art, or going out with friends, when if all we wanted was some distraction and some dopamine, then sitting back, eating some chocolate and watching some Netflix would have been a far more efficient way to do it. It's this innate desire we all have, what drives us and explains us, this desire for goodness, truth, and beauty. And interestingly, we find that we are always left wanting more. There's nothing in this universe that fully satisfies those desires. Every time we experience goodness or beauty, there's always just a little something missing, something that's not quite right with the experience, something that could have been better, even if it's just this sense of disappointment that we can't hold on to this moment forever. Yes, I don't think it's the things and stuff in this world we desire, because if we did, then we would feel fully fulfilled by them. No, it is this taste of beauty and this experience of joy that we get from them. What we really long for is perfect goodness, beauty, and truth. Now the question is, why are we like this? And you're well within your rights to say it is just some weird quirk of evolution that we've ended up with this desire for something that doesn't actually exist in our universe. I don't think that's the case though. Thirst wouldn't exist if water didn't exist, and hunger would not exist if there was no food. The best explanation, I believe, for why we long for perfect goodness, truth, and beauty is this: that just as our bodies have been made by and for water and by and for food, so our minds have been made for and by goodness, truth, and beauty. I think it makes the most sense to understand that it is goodness, truth, and beauty themselves that brought this universe into being and are the goal and the end of this universe, and we humans who live within it. This is the third thing we mean by the word God. It's what a lot of religious and philosophical schools agree on. God is not just some particularly good or truthful or pretty being sitting on a cloud somewhere. No, he is infinite goodness, beauty, and truth. He is what created this universe and makes sense of why there is so much unnecessary goodness and beauty within it. He is what makes sense of why we so desire these things, and we cannot help but desire these things, because we were made from them and we were made for them. I suspect, however, there's a chance that we already knew this. Because when we're impacted by the beauty of a sunset, when we see the light of the sun hit those clouds and the beautiful hues of red, orange, and yellow strike us, and we feel caught up into something, haven't we always suspected that it was more than just a chemical reaction in our brains, but that we were encountering something transcendent? When we feel this compulsion to do the right thing, or a sense of anger at those who act without justice and fairness, haven't we always suspected that it was more than just our personal opinion on what's good or bad, but instead we were tapping into something deeper, a sense of right and wrong, a sense of our own commitment to goodness itself, a goodness that is beyond this universe? And when we've discovered something new about the way this world works, we've understood something about ourselves or the world around us, and we've had that moment of joy at this realization that we've understood something new. Once again, haven't we had a hint that it was just more than just a hobby for us? It was more than just something interesting, but that we were encountering something grand and good, worth giving our lives to, truth itself. This is the third thing we mean by the word God. The infinite goodness, truth, and beauty that made this universe, that is the end, the goal of this universe, and therefore what we all long for and commit our lives to. This is the understanding of capital G God that many have come to when reflecting rationally and sensibly on their experience of the world. That God is the eternal and infinite ground of all being that exists outside of our universe and brings our universe into being, not just some particularly powerful being within the universe. That God is the mind that created everything, that thinks the mathematics and the laws of nature and the rationality that bring forth the life that we see. And God is the infinite goodness, truth, and beauty that we all were made for and long for. My aim today hasn't been to try to convince you of the existence of this reality, God, nor has it been to answer some of the very real, very pressing, and very legitimate questions about this God. Such as, if God is infinite goodness, then why is there so much pain and suffering and mess, not just in this world, but in my life? It's a valid topic and a very valid question. What we've been focusing on today, however, is something a bit narrower, a bit more focused. Simply answering that question, what is God? It's a question you might be surprised to find that a lot of religions have a lot of common in. As David Bentley Hart puts it, this definition of God is one that, allowing for a number of largely accidental variations, can be found in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Vedantic and Bhaktic Hinduism, Sikhism, various late antiquity paganisms, and much more. It's as close to a universal definition of the word God as we're ever going to get. And as a Christian minister, sure, there is more I'd like to say about God, but there certainly isn't less. As we finish up, I'd like to leave you with this encouragement, the one we began with. Don't forget to look under your nose. Perhaps one of the reasons you've been struggling to understand or see God is that you've been looking somewhere far off in the distance for some invisible figure that would interfere every once in a while, and you've really struggled to see that figure. Maybe it's because you've been looking in the wrong place. Maybe God isn't out there, but He's right here, closer to you than you are to yourselves. The ground of being that holds you together, the mind that calls forth your mind in thought, the goodness, truth, and beauty that you long for. Don't forget the encouragement that comes from the fish. If you struggle to see that water exists, it might not be because it's not there, but because it is always there. If you struggle to see God, it might not be because He's too far off, but because He is so close.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. There's a lot to take in that, and so the way forward from here is up to you. That could have been a nice presentation for you, and then you go on about the rest of your life, and that's fine. If you want to look over what was in there, there are copies of the transcript of the video on the table in the breezeway there. There is also, you could find on our YouTube page a copy of the video to watch again and enjoy my lovely editing. There are further resources where some of that information that he's talking about, but further ways to explore what is in there. There's a sheet in the foyer also to list other resources which will help you to grapple with some of those questions. Also, you'll find in the pew in front of you a card like this. This is somewhere where you can put your name, phone number, email address, or just whatever information you want to give us. And then there's an option for how we proceed. How do you want this conversation to continue? You can tick chat, which means you might just want me to contact you to have a chat and see how things are going. We might be able to organise a discussion group around different things. Or we have the 3-2-1 course, which is a way that today we've looked at what God in general means, but 3-2-1 is more of a way to think about maybe the particular Christian take on God and what that is. And we'll be running that here at this time on a Sunday night over the next few weeks. It goes for 4 weeks. We might have a week off for the long weekend, but it'll be a time for us to come together and discuss these things. So it's very easy. They'll show a video and then people will just say what they think of the video. There'll be no one pushing a particular agenda, but a place for us to discover what happens next from that. There's also a box to tick saying that you'd be interested in more events like this. So thank you for coming. Thank you for engaging with these ideas to think about what it might be that this universe is about. And I have it on good authority that there is a delicious afternoon tea out there for us to enjoy and discuss things as we feel we want to there. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to chatting with